graphics, but also to move things around, experiment, and really develop a style for your website. So once you've actually created your Photoshop mockup, which you see here, you're actually going to go ahead and then break it apart and then build a website from that. Code the HTML, code the CSS. So let's talk quickly about layouts. So here are just some quick questions. What do we really mean by layout? By layout, when we say layout, all we really mean is, the general structure of your site, where things are, how they're arranged, and how they interact. And how many different ways can you design your layout for your site? As many ways as you want. But with that said, some layouts are going to be better suited for certain purposes, and some layouts are going to work better on your laptop or computer than some other websites. Some layouts just might not make sense on your particular device that you're viewing it on. Right? If your layout is for an iPad, it might be quite different than if your layout was mainly for laptops, right? So now that laptops or iPads actually exist, people are taking that more into account. Before it was just laptops, and so that wasn't so much of an issue. And what makes a good layout? Well, a good layout is really going to, there are a lot of things that can influence if it's a good layout or not. Some things to really think about when you're trying to design a good layout, hopefully you're trying to design a good layout, is to make it consistent, because you don't want your users to go from page to page and have to figure out how to use your site all over again. And you want to make sure that's part of it being easy to use. And you also want to keep in mind that form really does follow function. So if you're making a portfolio website, your layout there might be very different than if you're making a website for a decal or something like that. And the last part of making a good layout is really trying multiple times. So in Photoshop, you can really do that. You can move things around, create one version, create another version. The only way you're really going to come out with a good layout for your purpose is to try it multiple times. And even when you finish building the site and people are using it, you're still going to find out that some things need to be tweaked in order to make that layout better. And we're going to actually talk about how to build layouts soon. So when we talked about, are there any questions really quickly before I go ahead? I think that's pretty basic. Okay, so let's talk about components really quickly. So when we said layouts, we're really talking about the arrangement of components, right? So what kind of components do we normally see on a website like this? You see things like the menu, headers, a slideshow, which is really just a collection of images, and we see other images, right? But if we step back a little bit and we generalize, what we see on most websites that we visit, we see things like headers, a navigation system, main content, sub-content, and a footer. And most layouts and most websites basically have this. They're just arranged a little bit differently, right? It's structured a little bit different. Facebook looks different than this site here, but it has essentially the same kind of components, right? Features. So let's quickly just look at a couple other websites and see how they decide to choose their layouts. So here's one, and this example here basically looks very similar to the one that you guys just saw. The only difference is they have kind of a little bit of content here. But the header and the menu bar are still at the top. They kind of have sub-content here, and they have a footer here. So it's still a very linear layout. It's another website. This one's a little bit different. It's not too different, but a little bit. And what you see here is the same kind of menu system at the top, kind of a large graphic, and then they decided to do something a little bit different with their sub-content, which is to actually create just a sidebar. And here's another one as well. This one's actually pretty cool. So let me see. It looks a little bit. This one looks a little bit different on this computer. But anyways, kind of a similar thing, except that they split it down the middle, and your header and your kind of main graphic is on the left, and then your main content's on the right. And this and the menu system basically actually stands still. So when you're scrolling, only the content scrolls on the right. It's kind of interesting. And this site is a little bit similar, but instead of having like a clearly defined edge to the navigation system, the whole background scrolls. And if you click to different pages, it doesn't actually load another page. It kind of just scrolls through this super, super long page. You can actually make a site like that one that you just saw, where the sidebar is standing still with just CSS. If you're doing, yeah, actually all those sites you could probably just do with just CSS and HTML. The JavaScript didn't really come into play there much. It was probably used like a little bit for setting like your current location on the menu bar, but besides that, that's all just HTML and CSS.
Are you talking about the scrolling?
Yeah, scrolling.
When you use like JavaScript for animation?
Oh yeah, sorry. Amber made a good point. There's animation on that site that you just saw where they're clicking through the different menu things and it's scrolling. It's not just jumping to another location. That's JavaScript. So JavaScript is actually scrolling your page for you smoothly. If you didn't use JavaScript, you could still kind of have the same effect, but instead of your page scrolling, it would just jump down the page. So it wouldn't be a smooth transition. Okay. Sorry, let me just get back to where we were. I'm just going to be fun and not explain too much, but it's just basically highlighting the different components of the site and how they're laid out. And that's what I was saying. This site actually looked a little bit different on a larger screen. The way it works is he actually had his main content and his sub content next to each other like this, not underneath each other. I thought it was pretty interesting. Okay, so at this point we would talk about how to actually go about mocking up an example like this in Photoshop, how to design something like this. But we're actually going to skip that and go to it in another lecture, a later lecture. Right now we're just going to assume that we've actually already created our design in Photoshop, an image of what we want to build. And just get back to HTML and CSS and figure out how to actually build that image that we have, just so we can finish up HTML and CSS, wrap it up. We go and talk about other things. So here, kind of the step-by-step stages to going from a mock-up of your website to actual HTML and CSS. First thing that I do, and probably Amber does and John does, is we, given our image, we kind of break that image up into different components, just kind of like we did before. And then, you'll notice that basically every component is actually going to relate to a div. And then from there, once you have these divs, you're going to actually go ahead and fill in each div with the HTML, and at the very end, you're going to apply CSS. So some quick examples of that. One thing is, we're always going to work from the outside to the inside. We're always going to work top, bottom, and left to right. And the reason for that is because the way that HTML is written and the structure of HTML is that kind of sub-components are always nested within larger components. So you always want to build out to in. And also, it's always top to bottom because that's just a normal display order of your elements, right? If you have two paragraphs and you want to code something in the top paragraph, that better come first in your HTML. And then left to right is basically the same reason. So we're going to start off with the red div, and then working outward to outside to inside, we're going to go ahead and code the menu and the content, right? And the menu and the content are basically the two major components that we identified in this photograph, right? And then we're just going to talk about the menu. And inside the menu, we're going to work top to bottom, and we're going to just fill in the menu outside to inside, and we're going to say that it's a list, and we're going to have just a bunch of different links. You guys understand that? Any questions? So you always want to work, outside to inside, top to bottom, left to right, just so you have, your container component set up before you try and fill in all the details. Okay. So we mentioned the div element in lecture already, but we haven't gone over it formally, so let's do that now. Divs are really the general building block of your website. It's the containers for all your different components. And what that allows you to do is, besides separating out your component, I'll show you an example of what we mean by separating different regions of your code. But it allows you to apply things like background images, background colors, to apply a set of text sizes or the text size or text styling that's going to be inherited within descendant elements. divs, when you're not talking about building a website, are used to logically group part of your HTML elements. And divs are kind of like spans. They actually visually don't have much of an impact on your HTML. If you coded in divs and you dragged it into your website, into your browser, you looked at a version without divs, that site would essentially look the same. But there's a difference between divs and spans, and the difference is that spans are inline and divs are block level. So when I said that there's no visual effect by adding divs to your document, that's not quite true. There is kind of a visual effect. If you wrap elements in a div element, what happens to those elements? You guys know?
They're separated.
Yeah, so whatever you wrap in your div elements are going to appear on their own line from surrounding elements. Right? So to really illustrate how divs separate out your code and really define the different components of your document, let's just look at this example. So there are a couple things going on here. There's a menu system and there's a news story. And there's some links in the news story and there's some links in the menu system. But looking at this, it's kind of unclear, right? Which elements correspond to what part of the web page, right? What's part of the story and what's part of the menu? You might guess that, well, there's a bunch of links there, so it's probably having to do with the menu. But that print story button probably makes more sense to be part of the actual story than the menu, right? So we introduce divs. And to introduce divs, all we do is just wrap our existing code inside divs. And you can see right now it's much more clear, right? There's no question about what elements belong to which component. Okay. So like I said, we're actually going to skip photoshopping the mockup for now, and we're just going to dive into what we do when we actually have a mockup that we want to build. So we're going to build this site. This is the link to the actual website right here. I'm not going to bring it up because then I have to go back through all the slides. But let's just start off going through this step by step. So let's identify the components. Can anyone kind of just point out really quickly what the main components are of the site? So I know it's not too challenging, but just to get you guys involved so you're not sleeping. The header? Okay, good. So there is a header here, right? Anything else? Menu?
Menu. On the left.
Did you say menu? Yeah, so there's a menu. And then anything else?
Search bar, search.
Yeah, search bar, good. What about outwards? So let's work from outward inward, right? So there's actually one kind of really, really big, I guess, component in here. You guys see that? What would correspond to it? What?
Everything?
Kind of. So you said everything. Not quite everything, but I think it's hard to see. Sorry, there's not enough contrast, but there's actually kind of a box here. And this is actually content. And this is kind of negative space, just a bunch of black. So if you guys actually download the PDFs or you're looking at it on your computer, you go to the website, you'll see that. But there's actually just content on this side. And then within that, we have two sections, right? The menu on the left, and then we kind of have our content on the right. And if we wanted to go a step further, we could actually say that these are all, their own elements too. And then within these components, there's, a header and some text as well in the photo. So a lesson from that is basically everything that we've kind of boxed and said is, its own component is going to correspond to essentially a div of some sort. It might not be a div, it might be another element, but it's a very safe bet to start off saying that they're all divs. So does anyone, can someone help me actually code up these divs here? So maybe come to the board and just write out the general structure of this. Or just say it, maybe. It's not too bad. It's just nested divs. Maybe we'll just do, let's just do the menu side, okay? So ignore this large div. There's a div here, right? Inside this div, we're going to nest just two additional divs, right? Just next to each other. And they're not nested within each other, they're just one after the other. You can see that here. So we start off with the container div, which is red. Then we create the sidebar, create the content, which is the left and the right. And then we just fill in the header and the entries, the menu and the search bar. Okay. And the next step of that is actually translating each individual component, filling in all the gaps. So we filled in the form now.